August 1965, Van Tuong Peninsula. The heat hits 40 degrees and the 100% humidity makes the air feel like thick soup. You are crawling through elephant grass, green and sharp, tall enough to swallow a man whole. A sharp crack breaks the silence. Machine gun fire tears through the leaves inches above your helmet. You raise your M14 rifle, ready to return fire, but the 44-inch barrel snags hard on a thick, hanging root. You pull back. The walnut stalk, swollen heavy from the previous night of rain, creaks in your sweat-slicked hands. When you finally force the sights into alignment and squeeze the trigger, the massive recoil of the 7.62mm round throws the heavy metal barrel straight toward the sky. You miss the target. And now the enemy knows exactly where you are hiding. The mud soaks through your knees as you brace for the return fire. The M14 was a ballistic masterpiece that quickly became a tactical and logistical nightmare in the dense vegetation. I am going to tell you how a simple afternoon rain shower in Vietnam ruined the accuracy of America's most powerful battle rifle. You will understand why firing in automatic mode was so dangerous that our own platoon commanders sabotaged our weapons to stop us from doing it. You will see the exact physics, the weight, and the geometry that gave an unseen enemy carrying an AK-47 a lethal edge in close-quarters combat. The truth of this war is not what they printed in the official manuals. It is about the physical toll of carrying the wrong tool into the worst possible environment. If you want the version of this war that they do not put in textbooks, stay with me. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. The United States Army officially adopted the weapon in 1957, replacing the beloved M1 Garand. On the firing ranges, it commanded reverence. It was a beautiful assembly of polished wood and steel, capable of striking targets at 500 yards with pinpoint precision. It was considered a rifle for real men. When we landed in Da Nang in March 1965, we carried those impressive weapons onto the beaches with unwavering pride. We trusted the engineering. The metal gleamed with oil, and the sharp report of the heavy rounds gave us a sense of invincibility. We thought we were bringing a heavy hammer to a quick fistfight, but the rules of engagement were about to shift drastically beneath our combat boots. The wide-open spaces of the training grounds were gone, replaced by a green wall of unforgiving terrain. The core problem started with the military doctrine itself. Post-World War II planners envisioned the next major conflict happening against the Soviets on the open plains of Europe. They demanded a weapon capable of delivering precise, long-range fire across vast fields. The M14 was designed perfectly for that specific geometry, but we were not fighting on the plains of Europe. We were marching deep into the Asian jungles, where dense bamboo thickets and thick vegetation meant visual contact with the enemy rarely stretched beyond 30 meters. At that distance, precision meant nothing if you could not maneuver the weapon fast enough to acquire the target. It was a long-range instrument of war forced into the tight, suffocating space of a knife fight. The environment dictated the terms, and our equipment was fundamentally misaligned with the reality of the ground we were trying to hold. The physical toll of the weapon drained us before we even saw combat. The rifle measured 44.3 inches long. In the jungle, that length turned the gun into a hook, catching on vines, roots, and low-hanging branches with every step. The heavy sling dug a deep, painful groove into my shoulder under the 4.5-kilogram weight. The heat radiated around us, making it hard to breathe, and mosquitoes hummed a constant, maddening noise in our ears. Maneuvering that long piece of steel through the dense brush required constant physical exertion. Your arms ached from the effort of just holding it at the ready position. The fatigue settled deep into our muscles during long patrols. We were fighting the terrain just to keep our weapons pointed forward, wasting precious energy we would desperately need when the actual shooting began. We were hunting an enemy that operated like ghosts in their own backyard. The Viet Cong moved fast, carried light loads, and dictated the exact time and place of every ambush. When they struck, our response time needed to be measured in seconds. But swinging a long, heavy rifle through a thick wall of vines takes time that we simply did not have. The enemy understood the terrain and used our cumbersome gear to their advantage. We listened to the older Marines talk about the invisible fighters who could strike and vanish before a squad could even form a proper firing line. The jungle was already choking us, restricting our movements and draining our canteens. And then, the gray sky opened up, and the heavy monsoon rains introduced a mechanical failure we never trained for. The math was about to collect. The rain fell in sheets for weeks. The M14 used a solid walnut stock chosen for its durability in standard climates. But in the 90 to 100% humidity of the Vietnamese jungle, that wood acted like a sponge. It drank the stagnant moisture from the air. The walnut swelled, warped, and expanded outward. I remember sitting in the mud, cleaning my rifle, wiping off the foul-smelling mix of gun oil and swamp water. I ran my hand down the weapon and felt the rough wood pressing hard against the metal gas block. The deformed stock was physically squeezing the steel barrel of the rifle. The elegant woodwork that looked so impressive on the parade ground was now compromising the structural integrity of the weapon. The rain was changing the shape of the gun right in our hands. Let me explain the physics of the bedding problem and why that swelling mattered. Because the metal barrel rested directly on that wooden stock, the uneven expansion applied lateral pressure to the steel. That pressure shifted the point of aim. The rifle lost its zero entirely on its own. A Marine would carefully line up his iron sights on a chest-sized target at 40 meters, squeeze the trigger, and watch his heavy round shred the bamboo 3 feet to the left of the enemy. We were effectively fighting blind, carrying weapons that changed their point of impact based on the weather. You simply cannot adjust your sights in the middle of a frantic firefight to compensate for wet, swollen wood. The rain had turned our precision rifles into heavy noisemakers. The ammunition created a massive logistical burden on every single infantryman. The standard 7.62 by 51 mm NATO cartridge was huge and heavy. Carrying a combat load of 100 rounds of that brass and lead meant bearing a crushing weight on your hips and shoulders. Long-range search and destroy patrols turned into a grueling war of attrition against our own heavy gear. Every step through the rotting water of the rice paddies drained a little more fight out of our legs. We carried fewer rounds than we needed, simply because human knees and backs could not support the required weight over rough terrain. The physical cost of that heavy ammunition limited how long we could stay in the fight. I want to know what you actually thought the M14 was before you heard this. Drop it in the comments. The enemy we faced carried the AK-47 or the SKS. They fired the intermediate 7.62 by 39 mm round. The arithmetic heavily favored their side of the firing line. A Viet Cong fighter could carry far more rounds per kilogram of weight than any Marine in my squad. They utilized 30-round magazines, while we were restricted to heavy 20-round boxes. When an ambush was initiated, they could deliver a significantly higher volume of lead into our positions without stopping to reload. In close-quarters jungle combat, volume of fire dictates who keeps their head down and who gets to maneuver. The disparity in firepower was a simple, unforgiving matter of physics and payload weight. We were outgunned in the bush purely by the scale of our own heavy ammunition. There is a persistent myth that the M14 failed because it was a bad weapon that constantly jammed in the dirt. That is false. Mechanically, the rifle was highly reliable, far more robust than the early models of the M16 that eventually replaced it. The action cycled smoothly, and the firing pin struck the primer with force every time you pulled the trigger. The problem was never the internal machinery. The failure was a matter of ergonomics and environmental mismatch. It was a weapon perfectly calibrated for a dry, open battlefield, thrust into a muddy environment where engagements happened at 20 paces. The rifle did exactly what it was engineered to do. It just happened to be engineered for a different war entirely. We were simply carrying the wrong heavy tool for the job. Another common error is the belief that American infantrymen possessed superior firepower because we carried modern automatic weapons. We did not have that advantage. The M14 featured a selector switch designed for fully automatic fire, but attempting to use it in the jungle was a dangerous mistake. The physical recoil of that massive NATO round inside a 10-pound rifle meant the first shot might hit the intended target, but the second shot was already pointing toward the tree canopy. By the third round, you were just wasting valuable ammunition on the clouds. The weapon climbed so hard and fast that no standard infantryman could keep it leveled on a human-sized target during a burst. We possessed automatic weapons on paper, but the strict laws of physics rendered that theoretical capability entirely useless in actual combat practice. The recoil problem was so severe that it forced a change in how we operated. Our 24-year-old platoon commander, frustrated by the waste of ammunition during firefights, issued a strict standing order. He instructed the armorers to lock or physically remove the selector switches on our rifles. We were mandated to fire in semi-automatic mode only. The leadership needed to stop panicked men from dumping 20-round magazines into the sky while trying to hit an enemy hiding in the brush. We were carrying heavy automatic battle rifles, but we were explicitly forbidden from utilizing the automatic function. It was a bizarre contradiction. We bore all the punishing weight of a high-capacity machine gun without being allowed to use the suppressive fire it was supposed to provide. The tension in the squad was thick and heavy. August 1965 brought the ultimate test. Operation Starlight was our first major conventional clash against the 1st Viet Cong Regiment. We pushed deep into the Van Tuong Peninsula. The midday heat radiating off the heavy metal barrel burned your fingers if you touched it wrong. The smell of old sweat and harsh insect repellent hung thick in the stagnant air. We were exhausted, humping our heavy gear through dense hedgerows and hidden tunnel complexes. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of our boots sinking into the wet mud. Every man felt the strain of the 10-pound weapon pulling at his arms. We were walking blindly into a trap, carrying long rifles that snagged on every passing branch. What happens next took less than 4 seconds. 4 seconds that ended 81 days. The contact was immediate and deafening. Gunfire erupted from hidden positions less than 25 meters away. The deep, ear-shattering boom of the American 7.62mm rounds was quickly drowned out by the metallic, rapid-fire clatter of enemy weapons. We dropped face first into the foul-smelling mud. I tried to pivot my body, desperately attempting to swing the long rifle around to cover our exposed left flank. But the 44-inch barrel slammed hard into a thick, hanging tree root. The wood creaked as I wrenched it free, my heart pounding in my chest, my mouth dry with fear. In the seconds it took me to clear the weapon from the vines, the enemy had already poured dozens of rounds into our perimeter. We were trapped face down in the dirt, struggling with our own gear. I finally wrestled the rifle free, my hands slipping on the wet, swollen wood of the stock. I lined up a shadowy target in the brush and fired. The heavy recoil kicked my shoulder back hard, throwing the front sight off target and delaying my sight picture for a critical follow-up shot. Across the tree line, uninterrupted bursts from 30-round magazines pinned us firmly to the ground. The enemy had the clear agility advantage in the dense brush. We were stuck returning slow, deliberate single shots into a solid wall of incoming lead. Every time I fired, the muzzle climb forced me to spend precious seconds finding the target again. The physical mechanics of the heavy weapon were failing us in the exact moment we needed speed and maneuverability the most. The 20-round magazine emptied fast in the chaos. The frustrating metallic click of an empty chamber forces you to drop the heavy steel box into the mud and fumble frantically for another one. My arms burned with lactic acid from holding the 4.5-kilogram weapon in a firing position while keeping my face pressed low into the dirt. We were taking accurate fire from invisible angles, and our primary infantry weapon was simply too cumbersome to match their rate of movement. A fresh magazine clicked into place, but the weight of the gun made my hands shake as I tried to aim. The air smelled of burnt cordite and crushed vegetation. We were losing the ground game, pinned down by lighter weapons that allowed the enemy to shoot and move, while we struggled to reload. We did not win that firefight because of the superiority of our rifles. We survived that ambush because of the radio strapped to our backs. The real power of the Marine Corps in 1965 was not held in the infantryman's tired hands. It was located in the sky and out on the water. When the rifles failed to suppress the tree line, We called in immediate close air support and heavy naval artillery. The earth shook hard as heavy ordnance leveled the vegetation, silencing the enemy guns. The blast wave rattled my teeth and sent dirt cascading over my helmet. We used massive external firepower to solve a close-quarters problem that our standard infantry weapons simply could not handle. The reliable communication network saved our lives. Let me tell you why that specific tactic worked. The American command structure and the logistics of calling down precise high-explosive fire from miles away were unmatched by any force on the planet. That systemic capability compensated for our clear deficiency in close-contact infantry engagements. When the shooting finally stopped, the sharp smell of gunpowder mixed with the deep rot of the churned rice paddies. The Viet Cong withdrew into the shadows, leaving behind a heavily cratered, smoking landscape. Officially, the records called it a massive tactical victory for the United States. We had held the ground and pushed the attackers back. The doctrine of superior external firepower had worked exactly as intended, masking the glaring flaws of the men fighting in the dirt. But the victory felt entirely hollow on the ground. The physical cost was exacted directly on the men who fought the battle. Men with destroyed backs and blown-out knees struggled just to lift their heavy canvas packs and their long rifles to march toward the designated helicopter extraction zone. The shock of the heat and the sheer exhaustion left strong men unable to stand straight. I looked down at my mud-caked weapon, the wood deeply scarred and the steel hot to the touch. It was an excellent piece of engineering, but it was in the wrong place, at the wrong time. We had unloaded countless 20-round magazines without seeing exactly who we were hitting. The math of the jungle had collected its tax, and we paid it in sweat, torn muscles, and blood. The harsh reality of the weapon was undeniable now. The urgent reports went straight up the chain of command following those early operations. The bitter experience of the summer of 1965 forced a traumatic, accelerated transition within the Department of Defense. Soon, there were loud murmurs on the lines about a new black plastic rifle coming to replace our heavy wooden stocks. They called it the M14. It fired a smaller round and finally fixed the weight problem, though it introduced its own dark nightmare of mechanical jamming in the field. The M14 was quietly phased out, becoming the standard issue rifle with the shortest service life in the history of the United States Army. It lasted less than a decade on the active front lines before the military admitted the mistake and rushed a lighter, shorter replacement into our tired hands. The Ordnance Department eventually replaced the troublesome walnut with fiberglass stocks in later versions, but it was far too late for us sweating in the jungle. Yet, the legacy of the weapon is not just a story of logistical failure. Decades later, in the dry, sweeping mountain valleys of Afghanistan, where combat engagements frequently happened at over 400 meters, the military pulled the M14 out of the storage depots. They modernized the chassis, mounted heavy optics, and it was gloriously reborn as a designated marksman rifle. In that arid, expansive environment, the long barrel and the heavy NATO cartridge were exact advantages. It finally fought the long-range war it was originally built for, proving that the core engineering was always mathematically sound. The rifle just needed the right map. It found its redemption in the distant desert, far away from the heavy monsoon rains that warped its wood and rusted its polished steel. But I will always remember the sharp pain of the weight pulling down my canvas shoulder strap in the thick elephant grass. I remember the humid air suffocating my lungs, and the sheer, exhausting frustration of carrying 5 kilograms of long-range precision engineering into a tight knife fight in the deep mud. The records show the dates and the outcomes, but they do not capture the sound of a swollen wooden stock creaking under pressure when your life depends on the next shot. The weapon taught us that the terrain always casts the final vote. If this story deserved to be told, make sure someone else gets to hear it.